Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com. I had somebody hit me up on Facebook asking, how do you find the right placement for things in the stereo field? How do we find the right imaging for our record? And this is an incredibly important question. Pan is one of our most powerful tools, maybe next to levels, and yet we never seem to talk about it. So let's discuss some of the considerations we should account for when we're trying to figure out our stereo imaging. So I'm going to pop on in here. I want to play this down a little bit just so that we can calibrate, and then let's go over some of the concepts. So we've got this cool kind of like 6/8, 12/8 sort of rhythm thing happening here, but it kind of sounds a little bit messy. Like, it's very hard to pick out individual drums. It just kind of sounds like one thing is sort of flopping on top of the next. So one of the first considerations that we might have when figuring out our pan scheme is just, do we need separation and clarity? So here's an example where I guess technically we could leave everything kind of in the center and on top of each other, but it doesn't give us the same kind of sensibility if we were to say maybe take this one rhythm bell here and pan it off to the side and then suddenly get something like this. So even just in that one pan move, while it is still a little messy, just the sensibility of the rhythm and what we're hearing becomes a lot clearer. So just as like a pragmatic point that separation is easier to hear when things are literally separate, well, that's a good reason. Now, the antithesis to this is that when we separate things, inherently, we no longer glue them together. So if certain sounds are meant to glue together, let's say like a bass and a rhythm guitar, we probably want them in the same pan position because they're meant to connect. So if we need things to connect, we want to keep them in the center. A really common example of this that I feel like people not necessarily get wrong, but maybe kind of do things without consideration is if we have like a drum break and then like a shaker on top of it. So if we had like a drum thing that was going like and then a shaker that was going like just keeping time, a lot of the times you'll hear the drum break in the center and then the shaker will be like all the way off to the left. But I find that it's usually better if the shaker is either in the center or near center so that it connects with the break itself and helps keep that pulse and that time. So overall, I favor glue more than separation, just in my own practices, but I mean, it really just depends on what it's coming down to. So the next thing that we have to consider when we're laying out pan schemes is if there's already a prescripted map for where things should be. And this can show up in two ways. One could just be the assumption of where we're used to hearing things. A very common example would be like the string section of an orchestra. You would very commonly hear the violins hard left, you would hear the violas pulled a little bit more toward the center but still off to the left, the cellos would be center or maybe center right, and then you would have the basses to the right, right? That is a very common orchestral spread. We see something similar in choirs with the sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses in that kind of a left to right pan scheme. And this might be one of these cases. This is where I would need somebody to help me. Actually, the producer needs to kind of inform me because I'm not really totally up on. I'm not even sure if this is Yoruba music, but I'm guessing by the existence of the talking drum and the bata drum that it is. So, I mean, maybe if somebody's familiar with Nigerian music, they can jump in the comment section and kind of help me out here. But I don't know if there's necessarily a place where certain drummers stand, or if it can kind of be whatever. So if that's the case, I need to pan to those positions. Another situation might be if there's a room capture, and the room capture is placing things in certain spots. Overheads for drums, for example. If the overheads have the snare slightly to the left, typically we would put the close mic of the snare in the center, but we might want to experiment with having it slightly left just to kind of see what that feels like. Or if there's like a room capture with a band playing together and you've got the keyboard player with an amp on the left, you've got a rhythm guitar player on the right, you probably want to pan the close capture of the rhythm guitar to the right and the close capture of the keyboard amp to the left. It's just going to feel better than if you have the close mics flip-flopped and then the room is telling you a completely different story. Okay, next thing that we want to consider is the hierarchy of importance. So this is where understanding the music kind of becomes paramount. So when I play this, I need to figure out what's the importance of every element? This is important when it comes to our level balances. It's also important when it comes to our pan. So right off the bat, the kick drum is going to be pretty important in this rhythm section because it's holding down the pulse, right? So I think that the kick can make for a really, really good anchor for everything else to kind of sit on top of. But that said, it's not the most important drum in terms of what's talking to us. When we think about importance in a typical record, vocals tend to be the most important thing. They carry more weight than the rest of the instruments, so very, very frequently, the vocals will be front and center. We say front and center when something is important. I need to see you front and center, right? It's important that you're here because I need your attention. So the vocals usually go front and center. In this particular case, the hierarchy of importance, I would say, tells us that the talking drum is going to be the most important element. Although, just sonically speaking, it could be the omeles, it could be anything, but I would say it's the talking drum. So if I mute everything else and I play it, the talking drum is almost doing its own kind of vocal line. So I kind of feel like that's going to be an important thing. I also just know from the style of music that the talking drum is important. But again, because I'm not so sure on it, it could be maybe one of these smaller bata drums. So the question is, what's defining this? What's giving it the personality? What's the most important? And that's not always clear cut. You might have to use your subjective opinion in terms of, I think this is the most important thing to the record. One thing that we can try is we can say, okay, well, if the talking drum is not the most important, let's pan it to the left, and let's keep one of these omeles in the center. My ear is still kind of going to the talking drum. Let's reverse this pan scheme. Let's put the omele off to the left. Let's put the talking drum in the center. My ear is still gravitating to this talking drum. So in my mind, this is telling me that the talking drum is more important. My ear just keeps wanting to go to it. So with that in mind, I'm going to push the talking drum up a little bit, and then that's going to hold down the primary center weight. Everything else, the next most important things can find themselves hard left or hard right, and then the third tier of importance, the things that are kind of peripheral, they can kind of fit in the in-between spots, the spots that are a little harder to localize. So most important in the center, second most important, hard left or hard right, and then everything else kind of peripherally lives that way. Now, this is not biblical. We don't have to abide by it all the time. It's just good practice, good advice. Now, there is something to consider in that regard of center placement called symmetrical stereo. If we have like a lead guitar line that's doubled, that might be a very, very important element, but we don't have to necessarily keep them both in the center. We can pan them left and right, and because it's a double, it's something where they're doing the same thing. They will weight to the center, and so while they are technically left and right, the energy of them feels centrally balanced. So that's also something to think about. Now, for me, one of the most important things, besides the hierarchy of importance here, is going to be the rhythm, and that's the way that I tend to orient my panning, is the rhythmic communication between elements, because I tend to focus on groove. Especially if the records that I'm doing are kind of like dance-oriented records or very groove-oriented records, I tend to listen for rhythm, and so understanding how things are supposed to connect rhythmically is very important. Things that are supposed to complement or create the rhythm should usually go together, and things that are acting like counter rhythms, meaning they kind of reply or bounce off of each other, should go apart. So let's take a look at these omeles right here. When I play them together, It's kind of hard to tell which one is doing which. If I pan them apart, what you'll notice is that the image changes. So this is a counter rhythm. We're getting two of the hits over here, dun dun, and then we're getting a reply hit over there, don't. So these are doing counter rhythms, in which case it makes sense to have them apart, and not only that, it creates a new rhythmic dynamic of shifting between right and left. So we not only get the rhythm that's inherent to what they're playing, we also get the backbeat of the pulse, which is going left to right along with the kick drum. And now we can start to make things make a little more sense. For example, if I bring in this rhythm bell here, I can pan it either left or right and feel out which one is complementing the rhythm better. Does it work better on the left? Or the right? And I think in that case it was pretty apparent, at least to me, that it felt better on the right. It's helping with that dump 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 dump, right, going right to left. So now we know, because of where the counter rhythm is laying, okay, then the rhythm bell should at least be panned right-ish, if not entirely right. Now I don't think that the rhythm bell is all that important, so maybe it might help to pull it maybe halfway in, and that might give us the best feel. So I'm going to pull in the talking drum, I'm going to keep our rhythm bell there. And now we're starting to get a rhythmic concept and an imaging concept that makes sense. And then from there, it's just a matter of filling things in. Okay, we have shakers, we have sticks, you know, we have a shikere. Where does this belong? I'm feeling it on the left, so I'm thinking it's either going to be hard left or it's going to be partially left. So let's pull that in a little and maybe turn it down a hair just so it doesn't cover up the omele. Now, the other thing is, when we're looking at the entire percussion ensemble, there's also a concept about width, which is how dominant do we want our wide elements to be. So let's say that this percussion ensemble was living inside an entire orchestra ensemble that was designed for a cinematic piece in a film. We might not want the imaging to be so extreme as hard left and right. We might want to pull it in a little bit and then allow the string ensemble to take the space of the hard left and right. But because of the style of music where the percussion ensemble here is actually extremely important and everything else is kind of secondary, I think we kind of want the opposite imaging. We want to have the percussion taking the full breadth of the stereo field, and then everything else can be inside from that. And that's how we can define our imaging. So again, comes down to importance. You know, fear no mono, fear no excessive stereo. Just make bold decisions, I would say, and really get in touch with the music. And the panning should lay itself out for you. It should tell you where things want to be. Alright guys, if you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification. If you want to get access to full-length tutorials with lots of great information, go to weissadvice.com and join. And lastly, you know what we say here, we are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.